This audio file is for Religious Studies 200, Religious Myths and Worldviews. Joining me today is Tim Sampson, who is a chaplain at the Faith and Spirituality Center at the University of Calgary. Welcome here today, Tim.
Thank you, Craig. Good to be here.
Right off the get-go here, Tim, I know that you will probably want to start with a couple of disclaimers, one in regard to understanding myth and the other in regard to how you will or will not represent Buddhism.
Yes, that the voice that I bring and the approach that I bring is as somebody who is a practitioner of a particular tradition. I'm a priest in a very particular lineage and tradition called Soto Zen Buddhism, and that within that, I feel it's important to acknowledge that, as there is a saying in Zen, that the only absolute is absolute subjectivity, and that I carry with me at all times my own subjectivity, I see things through my own eyes, which are my eyes, and that I can speak only on behalf of my own practice and practice as I see it through this tradition. So I don't really feel I'm qualified or it's my position to speak on behalf of Buddhism or on behalf of other schools of Buddhism. I'm happy to offer my views based on my own practice and my own subjectivity.
Well, that's healthy, Tim. I think it's actually very helpful for us to be aware of the lenses that we wear, how we look at things, our own subjectivity. Earlier off microphone, you made a comment that I'm kind of hoping you'll expand on now. You mentioned postmodernism and Zen. Can you say a bit more about that before we get too deep into the interview here?
Right. I sort of dabble in sort of armchair philosophy a bit, and I recently came across postmodernism and found a lot of parallels with Zen. And this is a very limited view probably of both Zen and postmodernism, but I found some what I consider beautiful parallels. And the sort of tagline of postmodernism is to have some distrust of any grand story, or what they call incredulity towards meta-narratives. So any big story that accounts for everyone or everything or a lot of us or a lot of things is by its own nature somewhat untrustworthy. And I see the parallels with Zen in that if our priority in Zen is to be intimate, and there are many stories that encourage us to be intimate, then what is it that we can be intimate with? Can I be intimate with the world? Can I be intimate with history? Can I be intimate with a character like the Buddha who lived and died 2,500 years ago in a place very foreign to me? Can I be intimate with that? Well, I can be grateful, but I can really only be intimate with what's right in front of me. So that obviously is going to color and influence how I consider questions like mythology, worldview, these sorts of things.
When we think of the definition of myth for this course, the students are accustomed to rethinking, what a myth is already. Sure. We're not saying that a religious tradition is trying to fabricate a story to lie to people and deceive them. They would believe that there's an element of truth. And so as we do look at some of the myths that are representative of Buddhism more generally, maybe not yourself particularly, we're never saying that Buddhism is trying to fabricate.
Right.
So we do want to explore a couple of the big stories, the Buddha as a hero type figure, the spiritual battle that he had with Mara, perhaps the sacred tree, and we'll look at a few more. Okay with that?
Sure.
So Tim, why the hesitation on that question?
Well,
talk to me.
Yeah, so I guess it sort of comes down to what is my chief concern? What is my primary commitment, having taken myself onto this path of practice? And my concern is not what is true, or what is real, or what is out there, or what went on in history, or what's going on the other side of this so-called planet of ours. Those aren't my concerns. My concerns are, how can I be helpful? I can only be helpful in circumstances that I'm in the midst of. I'm not in the midst of history. I'm not in the midst of the Buddha's life. I can appreciate it in certain ways that can support my practice, But my concern is not whether or not things actually happened 2,500 years ago in a certain way or in this other way. Those aren't my concerns. So this is why there's hesitancy, is that I don't, and I've used this line with you before, I don't care really about if the Buddha did this or that, was he born like this or like that. On the deepest level, I don't care. I mean, yes, I'm happy to try to address that, but again, I don't really care.
So your investment in the traditional myths of Buddhism, your personal investment in them is just it's not a consequence to you. It's not that significant.
The lens that I would look at these myths is, and I think I mentioned this before, is sort of allegorically, where I have to look at, if I look at the life of the Buddha, what is it in me, in my life right now, that I can take as a lesson to support me, to support my practice, to try and lead a life consistent with my vows, given that this is the life expressed through the Buddha, rather than did this happen, did that happen, what happened after that, so on and so forth. So it's, again, different lens.
Right. So if we look at the story of the Buddha's birth,
okay,
in the Buddhist literature, there's the story that it's a miraculous birth. The Buddha is conceived in his mother's womb through a sort of a dream, not through a biological means of sexual intercourse.
Right.
So is that, when you talk about literalism and allegory, for you this is an allegory?
Yes. And just, thinking about it, how might that support my practice, support my vows? And what comes to mind for me is that, so the origins of this practice, of which I'm very grateful, is from this character, the Buddha. And in order for me to trust it, it's almost like I need to switch from the priorities of sort of an everyday life that comes with an investment in my family, let's say, as the most important thing, or these traditional family values. That sounds a little odd, but that...
Like community values?
Right, that suddenly my priorities are shifting to another realm. So when somebody takes priest ordination in Zen, the word for it is home leaver. And so in some ways you're leaving those values of family behind in order to pursue different values. So the way I look at this is that this practice, this tradition, is invested in and comes from something other than traditional family methods. So my investment is not just for those very close to me, my mother, my father, if I had children, if I had a partner and brothers and sisters. Those aren't my priorities. My priorities now are all beings. So I've left home. I've left that traditional family set of perspectives, and my priorities now is to love and cherish all beings. And so to be conceived in a dream of no beings, there are no beings in a dream, no beings, all beings is sort of other than father, mother, siblings. Mm-hmm. So I just see this as other than that very sort of the very family-centric priorities that we can invest in, right?
Right. So our textbook, The World of Myth by Leeming, on page 222, it says, from the moment the future Buddha was conceived, 4 angels with their swords in their hands kept guard to ward off all harm from both the future Buddha and the future Buddha's mother. No lustful thought sprang up in the mind of the future Buddha's mother. Now, when I read that, I see that the Buddha's mother is also privileged in this story to a certain extent. And she appears as a type of pure vessel to bring the Buddha into the world. So allegorically, is purity important, that the Buddha is born from a pure vessel?
I would say that what that encourages in me is a trust in this practice, a trust of where did this originate. And again, it's not whether it actually originated there, right? But what...
Not literally.
Not literally. But as I consider my vows and my path, and if I falter and I'm questioning my commitment, and then I can look back and say, well, where did this come from? If I'm lacking in trust, Where did this come from? It comes from this expansive, almost miraculous origin. And there's a greater chance in me trusting that rather than, oh, it came from just some schmo who had a mother just like all schmoes have mothers, right? So if I'm looking for an opportunity to get off the path, then I could say, well, he's just this guy. He had this mother. I have a mother. He's no better than me. I'm no better than him. So why would I make such a lofty commitment of my life to a path like this?
Okay, moving on then to the spiritual battle, Tim. When I think of the Buddha, again to the Buddhist stories, he at one point sits down in front of a tree, and he is determined now to become an enlightened being, or he is seeking enlightenment. He doesn't know what it is, perhaps. Right. It's beyond definition, but he is determined not to stand up until he is enlightened. He gains some sort of cosmic knowledge. When he's postured there at the tree, he is confronted by a person or a being by the name of Mara. And our textbook identifies that person as Mara the Fiend on page 226. This being comes against the Buddha so as to break his resolve to become enlightened. Again, now is this a literal Mara for you, like a demonic type being, or is there some allegorical thing going on here for you?
Well, every month in the Zen tradition, we renew our vows, and the very first verse we chant together goes, all my ancient twisted karma, from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, born through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. And the thing I want to key in on there is from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion. So I have greed, hate, and delusion within me. Where did it come from? It's beginningless. So that right off the bat says, don't bother trying to find the source of it because it's beginningless. So that's not our concern, the source, but it's there. And that's, again, all we can be intimate with is that it's there. I have my tendencies and my weaknesses and my fears that are expressed through body, speech, and mind. And so that to me is the Mara that I feel I can take from this story is the Buddha as a human being under the Bodhi tree has passions, has fears, is in the midst of greed, hate, and delusion. And our vows, just like the Buddha made a vow when he sat under that tree, our vows are necessary because these things will arise in us. We wouldn't need vows if we didn't have these tendencies. We would just follow our natural lives and do what we do. But we need vows because these Mara-like urges are arising in us. So our practice is that constant friction and dance between those tendencies of ours that are personified in this Mara figure. And with our vows or our commitment, just like the Buddha made his vow, his commitment under the tree, that's the place of practice where those two meet. Mara meets vow is the friction, the heat, the place of practice. So I see myself whenever I sit, which in Zen we have a commitment to do the very sitting that the Buddha did, is to experience that.
So is there a universal quality then to the Buddha's experience, or how the Buddhist story has come down through time, that it's not just him, but there's a universal quality that everyone is confronted by their own Mara or their own challenges to break their resolve?
When it comes to everyone, that's not a topic I have any experience with. My teacher tells me to see everyone as Buddha. So I can't speak to what everybody is going through. I'm invited. Again, my concern is not whether it's true or not that people are Buddha, but I'm invited to see all people as Buddha. My only concern is my tendencies and my practice. There's nothing universal, or it's not my concern whether or not there's anything universal. My only concern is my practice, dealing with my tendencies so that I can be a more intimate being with whatever it is that I'm encountering.
Okay, maybe I'm talking past you a little bit with my question. Can the Buddhist story relate to anyone that wants to access that story and see something of a journey that they might want to embark on themselves? In other words, the Buddha was confronted by something that tried to break his resolve. Can I expect that my resolve needs to be tested by something that would try and break my resolve? Like, is this a universal experience of all humans?
I don't care. I mean, it's sort of a categorical thing that often I say to people, if you have chosen to be on this path, and that's a very important qualifier, that it's almost like you are adopting a particular perspective if you have chosen to be on this path. So again, not what's true or real or what have you. In some ways, it's a construct that says, so you've decided you decided to step on the Zen path, have you? Well, consider this. Here are your new priorities. Are they true? We don't care. You've decided to be on this path. Here is the invitation, given that you have stepped on this path. And so there's nothing universal about it.
So if you're meditating, because you spend a lot of time in meditation as a Zen practitioner, and something is breaking your resolve, do you ever think, well, the Buddha went through this, I can get through
Yes,
it?
I can courage on this path, like any path, as I imagine. Courage is a necessary piece. And it's a challenging and difficult path with more obstacles than I can count. And there are many an occasion where I need courage and encouragement to continue. And the story of the Buddha's life says, and he is our ancestor. He's not everybody's ancestor. He is my ancestor. That's my new family.
Right.
He is my ancestor. Given that he is my ancestor, I can look back on what he did, what he went through, and take courage, and hopefully sort of that will steel my resolve a bit to continue.
Okay.
Given that he's my ancestor.
Okay, I really appreciate how you focus in on certain words, Tim. Like you focused on this choice to get on the path, the intentionality, and intentionality seems to be a very strong part of your construct.
Right.
That this is an intentional practice.
Yes.
Make it your
A very specific, you could even say,
Yeah.
a specific intention.
yeah.
There are other intentions out there, all of them, according to my view, that I've chosen.
Yeah.
All intentions are honorable, and this is a very particular one.
Okay. On to another specific of the Buddha, at
Sure.
least in the Buddhist tradition. There's the concept of a tree in Buddhism, which, as our textbook does demonstrate, the sacredness of the tree is somewhat. It's a very interesting motif to follow, whether it's Judaism and the tree in the Garden of Eden,
Yep.
the tree that had the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil.
Right.
There's a cosmic tree in Hinduism. There's a tree in Christianity in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the tree type of the crucifixion.
Yeah.
So our textbook brings this sort of general view of the tree. In a specific sense, it looks at the tree, the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya,
Yeah.
now a current pilgrimage site
Yeah.
in Buddhism. So what is the tree to you as a Zen practitioner, or does it have any significance at all?
As I appreciate the Zen tradition, one thing we focus on is it's as much what the Buddha did, if not more what the Buddha did, than what he said. So his teachings, sure, are very important, but what's probably more important is what did the Buddha do? And he sat under this tree. So the sitting piece in Zen is vital. In fact, it's considered sort of that's what the word Zen means, is basically sitting meditation. So a commitment to Zen implies a commitment to sitting. And and I don't know about the tree. I mean, the tree is obviously where the Buddha sat. We don't sit under trees. And I'm just trying to think if the tree in my practice has any sort of allegorical or supportive or encouraging element. I mean, in just sort of thinking out loud here, that there's a lot of focus on the natural world in Zen. In fact, the origins, when Buddhism came from India into China, it sort of blended with Taoism, which was a very nature-based set of views and priorities. And the natural world, and you may touch on this, or we may touch on this later, where the Buddha touched the earth as witness. So the tree being an expression of the earth, and us being very intimate and grateful for what the earth offers us. That's what sort of comes to mind right now, is that we'd be nowhere without what nature offers us.
Well, let's look at that touching the earth. I mean, this is one of the mudras or signs of the Buddha now with Buddhist iconography, that Mara confronts the Buddha and says, by what authority do you even come here to seek enlightenment? And is that where the Buddha touches the earth and says, the earth is my witness?
The message that comes through loudest for me with that is, we can't do this on our own. There is this sense and almost arrogance that I know what's going on, I have everything I need, I can just venture forth and do it, and I don't need anybody to help me. And with the Buddha went through various communities and eventually, in many ways, in a very solitary way, sat under the tree. But the message that comes through clearest for me is, whether it's for witness or support or encouragement or mutual acknowledgement, we can't do this practice by ourselves. Sangha, or community, in every Buddhist tradition is a vital piece. In fact, part of what's called the triple treasure, or the three jewels of Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, Sangha being community. We can't do this by ourselves.
And so the triple jewels, I take refuge in the Buddha,
Yes.
I take refuge in the Dharma,
Yes.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Yes.
The Sangha is community.
Yes.
I'm part of a bigger thing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not just me.
Yep. And there the Buddha, I mean, in some ways, we are on our own. I am the only one who can do my practice. So again, there's not this all or nothing, alone or together. It's like, yes, my intentions come from me, and I have to renew my vows and commit to my vows. And so that happens through this individual, expressed through this individual. And at the same time, I am nothing, literally, without the earth, without others. I am literally nothing. So both of those things are, if we need something to be true, then both of those things are true.
Tim, the deification of heroes, venerating, making a reverent approach toward the hero object or the hero person, whether that's Jesus or Confucius or Muhammad, in this case the Buddha. Each religion, makes some sort of decision in its tradition whether that person, whether that hero will be an object of worship or veneration, or some sort of remembrance will be applied to that hero's memory. What's the case in Buddhism? Is the Buddha worshipped?
Well, any good Zen response starts with, it depends. So the first thing that comes to mind here with this question is, so considering myself as a practitioner, considering the teachers I've had, considering my fellow practitioners, I imagine situations and have experienced situations where I'm meeting with a teacher, and I may actually, in that meeting with that teacher under those circumstances, express great resentment towards the Buddha for having caused so much trouble in my life. That there are many a story in the Zen world that sort of calls the Buddha a troublemaker. And I can appreciate that. Again, this can be a very challenging path, and I'm often thinking, God, anything would have been better than this. And if I were to express that to a teacher, they might see that and they might encourage me to honor and value and lean towards the more respect towards the Buddha given my current state. So that's one possible scenario. Another scenario might be that a practitioner is leaning into sort of the worshiping category where there is all this sort of it could be an overinvestment of venerating and honoring this sort of ancient, distant being, as great and beautiful a creature he may have been, and putting so much into that direction that a teacher might say, you know what, you might want to lean away from that a bit and sort of take a little more of your own personal responsibility, or be grateful not so much to the Buddha, but to venerate others in your life, or venerate yourself a little more, and lean away from this tendency to honor, venerate, deify something outside of ourselves. So there is, in the Zen world, it depends. I've shared with you before that there's a story about the Buddha being a dried shit stick. That might need a little context to flesh out, but that can be a very helpful encouragement to a practitioner if they are leaning too far in the other direction.
Right. It's in Zen, it's kind of a corrective, so it seems, that the dried shit stick, or if you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha,
right.
Another Zen saying,
Yep.
Don't focus on the Buddha.
Right.
The Buddha be grateful for the Buddha.
Yes.
He's done a work
Yes.
that is critical for turning Dharma,
Yes.
turning the wheel of teaching, but don't attach yourself.
Right. And I would say even be more specific in that, so be grateful for, be clear of what it is that you're grateful for, that you have found this path, and that you have you find it rich, you find it beautiful, and you find it supportive, and you find yourself amongst honorable fellow practitioners. So, and that couldn't have happened without the Buddha. So be grateful and be specific about the intimate details in your life as to what it is you're grateful for. And again, bringing it back to what's intimate and immediate.
Tim, the worldview of, I guess, the average person, here I'm going to make a gross generalization, but in the average person's worldview, we do tend to elevate certain places. We have memories of maybe where we went for a vacation. You think of sites in the world that have taken it to an upper level of sacralizing it. So sacred sites in the world, we talk about the Holy Land as Jerusalem. In the Buddhist world, there are 4 fairly specific sites that I'm aware of: the birthplace of the Buddha, the place of enlightenment, the tree, the Bodhi tree, Bodh Gaya, the place of the Buddha's first sermon, and the place of the Buddha's death. And these have become pilgrimage sites in Buddhism today, where people, and even tourist sites for non-Buddhists, to go and see these places. Do you have a comment on how these fit into your worldview?
I've done some pilgrimages myself, and the only Buddhist pilgrimage I've done, I've actually done it twice, is in Japan, and it's called the 88 Temples of Shikoku. So there are 88 temples dotted around the island of Shikoku, and what I particularly like about that pilgrimage, I'm a big fan of walking. It's about a 1,000-mile trek to go from Temple 1 to Temple 88. And one of the beautiful things about it is that Temple 1 is almost shouting distance from Temple 88. So you go around in a circle and end up going nowhere. You end up where you started, but maybe something shifted a bit. You're no further ahead. You haven't gone anywhere, but maybe things have shifted a bit. And a lot of Buddhist pilgrimages, and I think the ones that you described that are associated with the Buddha's life, a lot of Buddhist pilgrimages, there's one in Tibet that goes around a mountain called Mount Kailash, and again, it goes around the mountain. So you end up where you started, and I think, in terms of allegory, that is very consistent with a Buddhist view. Cycles and circles is a very consistent Buddhist view. I've also done some Christian pilgrimages, like the Camino de Santiago, and what's interesting about that, and I know we're not touching on the hero's journey of the Buddha, but with the Camino de Santiago, it's a line that you end up somewhere. You start from somewhere, and then you go and follow a linear path, and then you end up in this case, you end up in the city of Santiago in northern Spain. And I think that's, in my view of Christianity, that's very consistent, where there is this sort of linear, where we're born and we live and we die and then we go to heaven. So there is this sort of linear trajectory, whereas in Buddhism there is more the circular concern of rebirth and not actually trying to get anywhere. So I am a great appreciator of pilgrimage.
No, that's a good comment, looking at the linear and the cyclical.
Yes.
Western and Eastern worldviews are very much generalized in that way, that there's a linear view in Western thought and a cyclical view in Eastern thought, which also then bolsters the concept of reincarnation or rebirths in the Eastern worldview.
And I would say, I mean, just to make some mention of the sites you described, that again, I would see that as a way to just encourage somebody's practice. That you put effort, there's great effort involved in getting to these sites. There is some warming of the heart as you come closer to the source, and that is often seen the source. So if we can get closer and it warms our heart, then and that encourages your practice, then fabulous.
We're almost ending on a warm and fuzzy note there, Tim.
Sorry about that.
Maybe I'll have to edit that out. Hey, Tim, for students at the University of Calgary that want to come down to the Faith and Spirituality Center and meet you, you do keep hours there? I'm
usually on campus on Tuesdays or by appointment.
And you have often offered, I shouldn't say often, but occasionally you do offer meditation practices that people can take part in here at the U of C?
Yep. And you can find out about that through the Faith and Spirituality Center.
Well, Tim, it's always good to have you in as a guest in these online courses, in the podcast conversations. So thanks very much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you, Craig. I always enjoy it.